All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the ORCID US Community Showcase webinar. This is the 10th showcase in the series, which is really exciting. So let's get started. To start us off, we'll have some introductions. So your ORCID US community staff are listed here. Sheila Rabin, the Senior Strategist of Research Infrastructure Programs, Paolo Guhilde, the Strategist for the ORCID US Community, and myself, Kayla Ramhit, the Program Assistant for the ORCID US Community. We also will have some guest speakers today, so I'd like to introduce them. We'll be hearing from Laura Lernetz, Director of Open Education, Data, and Publishing Services from the University of Arkansas, and we'll also be hearing from Alicia Pucci, the Assistant Director of Scholarly Communications at Temple University. So I'll also go over the agenda for today. We'll start by talking about ORCID. What is ORCID? The three different parts of ORCID, and then we'll go into what the ORCID US community is, about the community's goals, and about ORCID adoption. And then we'll talk about ORCID globally, and we'll talk about some new features ORCID has implemented this year. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers, first the University of Arkansas, and then Temple University, and lastly, we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So let's start off with what is ORCID. So ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. ORCID is an identifier that is meant to uniquely identify researchers so that they can get credit and attribution for their work, streamline a researcher's digital identity so an organization can save time on administrative tasks, and keep track of a researcher's affiliations and contributions all in one place. ORCID is a nonprofit, community-driven organization that serves the global research community. There are three main components that make up ORCID: the ORCID ID, which is the unique person identifier that is free of charge to researchers and individuals; the ORCID record, which includes information about the individual from their employment history, education, and works, as well as many other things; and the ORCID API, or Application Programming Interface. The ORCID API allows the research community to work collaboratively with ORCID by allowing connections between the ORCID record and member organizations. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about the ORCID API a little bit later. So first, let's talk about the ORCID ID. An ORCID ID is a 16-digit number that is unique to the individual. It distinguishes researchers from each other and is free for anyone to use. You'll see here our volunteer researcher, Sophia, and her ORCID ID. You'll notice it looks like a link, and that's because it is. The ORCID ID links to an ORCID record, and if we click on this link, we're taken to Sophia's ORCID record, which is populated with information similar to what you may see on a CV or a resume. So the ORCID US community has an ORCID workshop for researchers that we put on quarterly each year that goes into more detail, but I'll briefly mention what could be found within an ORCID record now. So you'll see here that there's a section for different name formations, a biography, her country, and a section for keywords describing her research areas, and importantly, a section on her employment history. If we scroll down through her ORCID record, we begin to see the other sections: her education and qualifications, her professional activities such as membership, service, distinction, and invited positions, what funding she's received, any research equipment she's used, her works, which include publications she's written, and lastly, her peer review activity. So the other important component of ORCID is the ORCID API. ORCID provides a way for organizations to gain a better understanding of research activity across the scholarly communication ecosystem through the use of ORCID's API. The Application Programming Interface, or API, as I mentioned before, allows systems like publishing, repository, research reporting, and funding systems to connect and communicate with ORCID. So for example, the ORCID API can be connected with a publishing system like OJS or ScholarOne. And there's an exchange of data, flow of information, and this is all done via the API. So in this graphic, you can really see how the ORCID API works between different stakeholders. A research institution, funder, or publisher can read data from ORCID records via the ORCID API and use that data in their system for reporting or filling out forms, for example. Then those stakeholders can write information to ORCID records via the ORCID API. So a publisher, for example, could write works to an ORCID record, a funder can push grant awards, or an institution can push employment information, as well as other things. There are three types of integrations with ORCID. A vendor or open source integration is with the systems, such as I explained earlier, OJS, or even Esploro. Then there is the Affiliation Manager, which is a tool available to consortium members in the member portal, which pushes affiliation information to ORCID records. And the last type is the custom integration, which can be configured to best fit the needs of your organization. To integrate ORCID with the system, you do need to use one of your ORCID API keys. And now I will pass it on to Sheila to share more about the ORCID US community.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. All right, so let's talk about ORCID in the US. So on the next slide, we'll talk about the ORCID US community. So ORCID has a membership structure where organizations can either be direct members of ORCID or join through a consortium. So in the US, our ORCID consortium for nonprofit organizations is called the ORCID US Community, and it was formed in 2018 as a partnership between the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the Greater Western Library Alliance, the Northeast Research Libraries, and Lyrasis. So Lyrasis is the administrative home of the consortium, and we currently have 210 member organizations that include universities, research institutes, funders, societies, associations, health and hospital systems, and other research organizations. So on the next slide, as the ORCID US Community Consortium lead, we provide dedicated support, resources, and communication channels for ORCID US community members, all geared toward growing a robust community of practice around ORCID in the US. So with the consortium cost sharing and dedicated support that's available, we really hope to lower the barrier of participation for nonprofit organizations in the US that want to use ORCID, and ultimately raise awareness about the benefits of ORCID and other persistent identifiers, or PIDs, to serve a more fair research ecosystem. And of course, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So across our 210 member organizations so far, there are 363 software systems or workflows that are integrated with the ORCID member API, with over 500,000 researchers' ORCID IDs connected to those applications. And of those, almost 85,000 ORCID records have had information added to them from a member API integration. So in the pie charts on the left, we can see that of the data that organizations are writing to their researchers' ORCID records, some of the most common entries are employment affiliations, education affiliations, and also works. Primarily journal articles, but we're also seeing conference papers and abstracts, data sets, and lots of other different types of works. So on the next slide, we'll look at ORCID adoption across the United States at large, not just within our consortium, but all over the country in general. There are over 1 million active ORCID records that have some sort of US affiliation indicated. And by active ORCID records, these are people who have used their ORCID ID in connection with an ORCID API integration within the last year. And so another thing to note here is that the US federal government also has their own ORCID consortium for federal agencies and national laboratories. And so you can see a list of all of those federal government ORCID members here. All sorts of the federal funding agencies, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, etc. So they're all adopting ORCID, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide. So you may have heard, you may know that all of the federal funding agencies right now are creating policies related to ORCID, both for public access to federally funded research and research security. So the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Public Access Memo has a whole section dedicated to how persistent identifiers, including ORCID, should be part of funded output metadata. And then the National Security Presidential Memo 33, or NSPM 33, focuses specifically on researchers having a digital persistent identifier that meets certain criteria, and ORCID is the only PID for researchers that meets the criteria. So basically right now we're waiting for these agencies to come out with their ORCID-related policies, and you can follow some of them at this Public Access Plans and Guidance website. Um, for example, we know that NIH is going to require ORCID IDs from all of their funding applicants starting on May 25th, 2025. And we're expecting that several other funders will implement similar requirements. So stay tuned for that. And so now I'm going to pass it back over to Paolo to give us more of the global picture and latest updates.
Thank you, Sheila. So on the next slide, we're going to take a look at how ORCID is being used globally. So currently, right now, we're pretty much in every country on the planet. So it's about 249 countries, and we do have members, users that are connected in every country of the world. Currently, we have about 8.6 million or over 8.6 million that are active researchers. So active researchers are pretty much anyone that's either signed in to their ORCID record or their ORCID record has been updated. So that's what we can kind of consider as active researchers. And also, the more integrated systems, the better it is for everyone. And currently, we have about 5,700 or over that integrated systems across the world. And of course, there are over 1,400 organizational members, and that includes members of the ORCID US community as well. So on the next slide, one of the things that's been going on with ORCID is really the focus on trust in the last few years. So this kind of illustrate the community trust network. So from different systems, from different roles and responsibilities of organizations, it's really about a community and it's a network that's really kind of looking at how data are being pushed to ORCID that creates trust. Let's take a look at on the next slide where what we are calling as trust markers in ORCID. So trust markers is essentially what you're probably seeing now as sort of like check marks in your ORCID record or in somebody's ORCID record. And that really is the idea of validated source or validated data that's coming into ORCID. So there are two kind of screenshots that you're seeing here. The first one is talking about a trust marker in ORCID, and then the source is the Nature Publishing Group. That means that particular publishing group pushed that data to ORCID, and you compare that to the bottom screenshot where it's manually entered. So the source is the individual itself, the researcher. So the trust marker is kind of indicating that there's more authoritativeness to that particular entry. And on the next slide, what we're going to be seeing is that the more trust markers that are available in somebody's ORCID record, it is better for everyone in this sense, because we can kind of see where this information are coming from. And then we can kind of take a look at how these trust markers are being used by everyone. And it's better for how the entire scholarly record becomes for the trust markers. And there are a few things that are kind of new with ORCID, and we can kind of see that on the next slide here. So the first one is the record summary, and you can kind of see on this page, this is available in your ORCID record, and organizations can grab this information as well using an API key. But here you can kind of see that in that particular page, you will see that there are different check marks, different trust marker that's available in each of the sections. So affiliations, works, professional activities. And this one is actually an example from my own ORCID record. The new thing that also came out that's available on the next slide is this what we're calling verified email domains. And again, this is another trust marker in your ORCID record. In this sense, you can have your verified email domain show up in your ORCID record. So you see that on this box with a check mark that says lyrasis.org. So that's a verified email domain. And so those are the new things that came on this past year, at least. On the next slide, what we're really seeing here is that different organizations have a role to play. So there's that community that we talked about earlier, and basically it's an entire ecosystem that's elevating trust and integrity throughout the entire ecosystem. So including your ORCID record, the data that's coming in into that. So it's really about a community trust network here. And that's what we're kind of looking at today, is that organizations are pushing data to ORCID or using ORCID to kind of elevate trust and integrity among the entire research ecosystem. Now let's go to the next slide, and I think that will take us to our case studies today. So our first is with Laura Leonards at University of Arkansas. So Laura, you can go ahead and take over.
All right, my picture goes in and out, so I just have my, I've unmuted myself. Hopefully you can see my screen. Are you seeing the full screen or the part of the screen?
Full screen, it looks great. Thanks, Laura.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so glad it's working. Well, this is ORCID at the University of Arkansas. And I have to say, if I talk really fast, it's because I've been kind of in an ORCID sprint recently. And all I talk about and all I do is ORCID for the last 2 weeks. I don't have very pretty slides, and it's because of the sprint that we're doing. A little bit about our institution. We are in the northwest corner of the state of Arkansas, kind of in the center, if you don't know where we are. And the University of Arkansas I'm referring to is the flagship campus of Fayetteville, Arkansas. There are other campuses, but I'm not including those in our discussion today. We are an R1 institution. We do have a law school. The med school is in a different location with a different campus. We just reached on the 11th day 33,610 students, and we have over 240 academic programs. I've been a faculty member in the library for 33 years, and I've had a wide variety of jobs, starting with the head of circulation and moving through pretty much every department in the library. And now I'm the director of open education, data, and publishing services. I have been an ORCID fan since the beginning, being a data person. And before I even became a data person, I was interested in ORCID. And before 2024, which is this year, actually, when we were first talking about establishing our faculty information system, and I think this would probably be 2018, 2019, discussion of ORCID occurred with other members of the library faculty and the research office, and they chose not only not to start ORCID, but not to even endorse it, unfortunately. I was very upset about this. And so our faculty information system right now doesn't even have a place where you can put your ORCID number. I don't know why we took that stance, but we did. So as I moved through and changed jobs in 2020, I started these internal discussions of how we really needed to get with the plan, get with the program, start acting like the kind of institution we want to be, and start being part of the ORCID membership. It took 2 years to convince people of that. And then in 2022 in spring, I think it was April, we started signing the contract to be an ORCID member. Now we had no plan of what we were going to do once we became an ORCID member, other than I was going to make something happen. And it was a personal, I don't know, a personal thing for me. So we signed the contract, and I started to try to work on campus, and I was working a lot with the research IT department, doing various activities, research capabilities, etc. And so over 2022 and 2023, I tried to talk about establishing ORCID as an on-campus thing. And one of the first things we had to do was single sign-on. And I talked and I talked and I talked, and it wasn't until an SPM 33 started coming into view, and thank you, Sheila, for mentioning that, that document was talking about something, persistent identifiers, and what Laura's been talking about this with ORCID. So maybe they're related. And so I started getting some ground covered when in December, we developed our single sign-on so that we could sign on to ORCID. And then things started moving quickly. I started teaching people in different research groups how to do ORCID and Science CV. because we realized that NSF and NIH were requiring that, and the best way to fill that out is using your ORCID record. So I started promoting that, and eventually, especially because of that security piece, the research IT started supporting me. And then I talked to the Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, and she was brand new in that position. And she definitely supported this activity, saying this is what we need to do to ensure that our researchers are identified properly as being at our institution. And it was actually she noticed that she hadn't even changed her record to say our institution. So it came to clear to her that she and other people needed to participate. And so she helped me to try to get the data, because that was another sticking point, was how was I going to get the data? How are we going to connect to our systems? At the same point, after I got her support, I got the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs support and also the graduate school support. And people started glomming on and wanting to participate. I'm not asking them to do anything but put their name on any outreach I do, and occasionally mention it. So that's all I've asked, and they were willing to join. In this last summer, I looked at what I had from ORCID as ORCID membership and looked at how it looked on our campus. And I used this as a point to drive home to our research office that we weren't really getting a lot of our faculty involved with ORCID. And you can see it's not surprising. It was about 14%, which was disturbing, but well, we didn't do anything prior to this, this time. So my plan was, literally it's my plan, I'm afraid to say, but I love it, is we decided to start tackling the tenure track faculty first. And we wanted to then to work on planning how we're going to do that long term and do other employees long term, and then look at a graduate student loan for not for employment, but rather as education, because the grad school is really anxious to do that. So the process of obtaining the data was really a problem, because we had a homegrown system for our campus for the longest time, for almost the entire 33 years I've been here. And we recently moved all the faculty and employment data to Workday. And we are now moving the student information to Workday. So our faculty information was a real kind of somewhat sloppy mess, not horrible, but not necessarily all following the same. Different departments did different things. So it was all not similar necessarily in the data. And it was decided when we went to Workday that they wanted nothing to connect to Workday. They were going to put all that information into a data lakehouse, and that anybody wanting information had to go through that to obtain it. And so even though I tried and tried and tried to work on an integration with Workday, I was told, no, all we can do is pull the data for you from the data lakehouse, which I've been here 33 years, so they kind of knew me, but it did take several weeks of them arguing whether I could get that data or not. So I obtained the data on August 26th, less than a month ago. I reviewed the entries and cleaned the data. And by getting it, it was really interesting because I could see in the future with Workday what kind of fields we wanted to pull from what kind of tables. And so it really did, getting that data for me in a form that I could play with actually was a way for me to understand the data we're putting in better. I realized through this cleaning and looking that we have nothing for our College of Agriculture. Well, not nothing. We have 10% of our College of Agriculture faculty. And that is because they are primarily paid through the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. And therefore, those tables are owned by UADA and are not accessible by my IT people. So I could not get any of the data for any of our faculty from the College of Agriculture. Little bit of a problem. So I started outreach And literally, we're talking a couple weeks ago. So my first outreach was during the faculty orientation. I'm basically one of the few Lauras on campus, believe it or not. So they kept saying, go to Laura, she's at the faculty orientation table, go to Laura, she's going to do this, etc. And everybody, they made a big point that Laura was going to email you. And then you're going to get your ORCID ID if you don't already have one. So that was during the faculty orientation, as well as the meeting of the chairs of departments. And I go to that meeting regularly. I then posted on the daily headlines on September 4th that they're going to receive an invitation. And I used this image that I found on the ORCID site for materials. They have lots of materials that we can use to publicize ORCID. And I particularly liked this one. It was very catching and people really liked it. So we advertised that I was going to do an email. And this is the weird thing. Because of our institution and the people in our institution and how we move forward, I decided to do a very personal approach. So I sent an informational email, and I sent it to all the individuals by department. So I kind of parsed out our data by department, and I did approximately 8 departments a day. And then I began on, I started that on September 6th. So they saw the announcement on the headlines, and I immediately sent an email saying, I'm going to send you an email with a link. And as people asked questions, I could respond to them immediately. I had links to my ORCID LibGuide available so they could read it. I could send them personal notes if need be. And then I finished my last full batch of informational emails last Friday. And then several days after the informational emails, I would send out the permission links what I would do is I would input the materials in our affiliation manager, pull out then the permission links, and then send yet another mail merged kind of personal, as it were, letter indicating that there's a permission link and people should click on it, and they could go through the single sign-on and either create their ORCID record or allow us to edit their ORCID record. So my data comes from 9:45 this morning because I just finished my last batch yesterday. And so as of 9:45 this morning, 320 out of 751 people responded yes. And so that's 43% of the people I sent on the first email said, yes, I'm doing it, and did it, so that they say in ORCID in our affiliation manager. In that week and a half, I have 217 new people we didn't know were ORCID members or weren't ORCID members, and 41 that were identified last year. And 28 departments doubled their ORCID participation, which of course, if some of them were zeros, so that's a real small double, but out of 43 departments, 28 doubled their ORCID participation, and 23 on the first day I counted, and I only counted on the first day, had already over 33% participation per department, which I think I feel really good about that. So the next steps is I'm double checking. I did miss one department, and so I will be sending information to those contacts. I'm talking next week with the University of Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Agriculture rather, to get agriculture information in so I could do the agriculture college. I'm going to be talking with Research IT to obtain API link to the faculty information system, because I've been trying to say we were going to do that for the faculty who are getting ORCID, so they won't have to constantly add to their resumes. I am talking with the programmer that worked with me to help obtain graduate student information, since I know the grad school is very anxious to get the grad students in. And then because I'm weird and because, I don't know, my background, I saw that image about the ORCID records that are viewed, and I said, that looks like a coaster. So I've made coasters with that image, and I'm going to be sending them out to people who have already accepted the challenge of accepting their ORCID. And I'm going to give give with that some information and how they can populate the works and other information into their accounts. And then I will rinse and repeat with the remaining faculty. So that is the story of the University of Arkansas's program.
Thank you, Laura. I love the coaster as well. And thank you for sharing your journey with ORCID and talking about affiliation manager. If you have any questions for Laura, we will have some Q&A after all our speakers have spoken today. All right. Thank you, Laura. Okay. So, all right. So I think what we will do is we can go to our next speaker. Let me set this up. All right, so our next speaker is Alicia Pucci from Temple University.
All right. So yes, I'm Alicia Pucci. I'm the Assistant Director for Scholarly Communications for Temple University Libraries and University Press. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all today about our ORCID promotion efforts here at Temple. And I hope that you will leave this showcase a little bit more inspired to adopt similar strategies at your own institution. I know that I already am after hearing from Laura about all her work at the University of Arkansas. So to understand why ORCID is valuable to us, you need a little bit of background information about Temple. So Temple is a public, state-related, and R1 classified institution, and we are located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We serve roughly 30,000 students, over 2,000 full-time faculty, and researchers across 5 regional campuses, which is to say that we're fairly large, and we're fairly well spread out across 17 diverse schools and colleges. And because of how we're structured, much of our research activity is occurring in a very decentralized way, which makes it a bit difficult to track, and in turn also support, particularly from the perspective of our libraries and university press. So in response to this issue, and also Temple's shifting scholarly ecosystem, the libraries revised their strategic plan in 2017. And one of the strategic actions that was deliberately included was this call to explore new collaborations in programming, publishing, and scholarly communication. And that was with the intention of finding new ways to engage with Temple faculty, and also adopting these new approaches for sharing scholarly products, among many other things. So the library's decision to join ORCID in 2017 was, as one of many other ways, a direct response to achieving this strategic goal. Now, I do just want to pause for a very brief disclaimer to say that all our adoption and early planning work happened before my time at Temple. So I just want to make sure that credit is given where credit is due. So I'm going to be dropping a few names on this slide. So our membership was spearheaded and overseen by Annie Johnson, who at that time served as the Library Publishing and Scholarly Communications Specialist. And I will say that Annie is now the Associate University Librarian at the University of Delaware. And this early outreach was supported by Annie's interdepartmental Scholarly Communication Strategic Steering Team. And I will say that this team continues to lead ORCID efforts at Temple on behalf of the libraries and university press. And any early planning and promotion was spearheaded by scholarly communication librarian Maria Agazarian, who in 2018 was visiting from Swarthmore College. So this is to say that the groundwork for our ORCID efforts, including things like our promotional materials, our resources, and our outreach plans, are really in large part thanks to Annie and Maria. So before this work started, we were reporting 205 publicly available ORCID profiles, and these were profiles who noted Temple as their current place of employment. And that was back in May of 2017. And it was no surprise that of these profiles, our School of Medicine had the highest number of researchers with ORCID IDs at Temple. And that was closely followed by our College of Science and Technology, which is represented by these larger blocks in this chart. But to date, our membership dashboard now reports 933 ORCID profiles that are like this, with most of those having been created over the past 2 years, which is when the libraries revisited our ORCID promotional efforts. So what strategies did we employ to get here? I'm just going to briefly cover these 3 categories, so those being outreach, education, and integration, but I don't want to get into the weeds of any technical details or like what our workflows are. So much like in our early days, we organize tabling events across campus where we share a variety of ORCID swag when we ask researchers to register for an ID on the spot. And we also field questions, about how to populate, if they already have an ORCID ID, how to populate their profiles and things like that. And recently, these events have been co-hosted in collaboration with other offices on our campus, like our Office of Research and our Information Technology Services. And these have been part of a larger, what's been called Research Resources Day, and that's open to all disciplines. So we're getting a variety of faculty, and we're speaking to a variety of faculty. And these green lollipops that are on this slide have been a particularly popular hit, although there's still no consensus as to what flavor they are. We just got some green lollipops and included the ORCID sticker on them as further swag and promotion. So a recent project that our ScholComm team completed was establishing an ORCID toolkit for use by library staff. We took inspiration from Erica Finch's ORCID toolkit, which was at Utah State University. So basically, we compiled all our existing promotional and information materials on ORCID that had been developed over the years. So things like blog posts and handouts and posters, elevator speeches, slides, materials needed to organize a tabling event, and also an FAQ document. So the image on the left here, the image on the right of this slide is one of the postcard designs that was created by Maria and also our library's graphic designer, who at the time was Rachel Cox. Now, I will say that the toolkit is currently used for internal purposes, so it's not publicly accessible, but if anyone is interested in seeing what's in that toolkit, just feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to share it with you. So these are the 2 API integrations that I'm most familiar with. The first is our integration with Temple's instance of symplectic elements, which was branded as Faculty Profile Builder, and that was used to track the scholarly activity of our faculty. And although the current status of the project remains up in the air at this time, ORCID was initially connected to that system as another data source to help populate these faculty profiles in a much more effective way than what was originally being done, and with information that was already verified. And then the second integration is with the library's instance of open journal systems, which is also known as OJS. So we use this to support any student-run open access journals, and in some cases, our editorial boards wish to take advantage of the system's ORCID integration. So in this example, which comes from our College of Public Health's journal called Common Health, you can see that the author's ORCID IDs are included on the article page. And this also allows the system to automatically add that article to the author's ORCID profiles without having to do it manually. And I do also want to mention that we have 2 alternative integrations that don't function via API. So the first is employed in our institutional repository, which is called TU ScholarShare. And this platform is a customized DSpace platform called Open Repository, which is hosted by our vendor Atmire. The image on the left just shows a screenshot of what the ORCID IDs look like in an item record in the repository. So they are entered in the metadata, and the icons that appear next to each author name can be clicked, so people are redirected to those profiles. But they don't have the functionality to write to those author ORCID profiles. Not in our current instance, at least, although we are hoping to explore this functionality when we upgrade to version 7 soon. And the second that's employed is with ProQuest's ETD Administrator, which our graduate school requires students to use to submit their theses and their dissertations. And we collaborated with the graduate school to add this ORCID field to their submission form, so that students' ORCID IDs can be included in their records when we receive them in our institutional repository. And I would say that in recent years, at least half of the theses and dissertations that we receive include ORCID IDs, and that's without having done specific, like, coordinated research to grad students. So needless to say, we've learned a few things, and we continue to do so after implementing these strategies over both the long term and the short term. I would say that the major takeaway for us at Temple is that campus adoption across disciplines can be really slow and inconsistent. And that's to be expected considering a variety of factors, and some of them are not really totally within our control. And these 2 bullets that follow are sort of in response to this, which is to say that we've learned that clear and consistent messaging must be drafted and shared with all campus advocates, especially library staff who are doing the bulk of these promotional efforts. And this goes hand in hand with the fact that collaboration with administrators across campus offices is really key to advocacy. We've only recently, over the past few years, started aligning our ORCID outreach with the efforts of our Office of Research and also our Central Technology Services. And that's going to be even more crucial as our campus starts to develop policies for addressing those new federal public access mandates. And not to end on a bittersweet note, but we do recognize that there's a lot more that we could be doing, whether that's writing to our researchers' ORCID profiles or taking advantage of other API integrations. But I will say that we are selective about what we have the capacity to take on, and that's totally okay. Because while we are strategic about the kind of promotion that we do, we also recognize that this sort of education and adoption happens very organically, at least for us at Temple. And it's mostly because it's carried out by many people at Temple. So that's not to say that we won't be working towards expanding our efforts in the years to come. So that said, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Laura. Go ahead, Sheila.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, so that takes us into our Q&A and discussion portion. So let me just get up. There was already one question in the chat, but of course, if anybody else has questions, do put them into the chat. The first question was for Laura. So Laura, you mentioned that University of Arkansas has a law school, and it looked like the law school participation was significantly lower than the other schools. So can you speak to what this rollout looked like at the law school and any special outreach that might have been done or anything like that related to the law school?
I really can't help anyone else with this very much because I was very lucky that our new Vice Chancellor of Research and she is on the law faculty. So I had an automatic, when I had her join in, I had the law school join in. So they are running about 32% of the law faculty have signed up for ORCID and have gone through this process. So they're doing the same as the rest of the campus at this time. And again, it's because I have a vice chancellor who happens to be in the law school.
Well, that's really good to know, and that just highlights something that we've kind of noticed over the years, which is, you know, ORCID adoption and the ability to partner with other internal stakeholders and all that kind of stuff is very much dependent on the individuals who are in these positions of influence and decision making, and also someone like yourself who has kind of this personal vision and mission of wanting to see ORCID adoption. So yeah, great to know. Another question for you, Laura, was there any financial support at University of Arkansas, or was the ORCID membership fully funded by the library?
The membership was fully funded by the library. We decided that initially it was because I was pushing it so much, but we also decided that that puts us in good stead. Because I think as we started talking about ORCID, faculty didn't really see the libraries in a role outside of purchasing journals and purchasing materials. So getting us into the role of scholarly communication was really important to us. So I think, so all the funding came from the library, and they also paid for the coasters, the second batch of the coasters. I paid for the first batch.
Nice, thanks, Laura. And that really also reflects the trend that we've seen across our ORCID US community, which is at universities, typically it has been the library that's taken the lead with ORCID. Really up until recently, now that these federal policies are coming out, more of the people in the research offices and other areas of campus are getting involved. So we now have some universities where it's actually the research office or the grad school or another unit that's leading the ORCID adoption, but for the most part, it's the libraries. We have a question here. What faculty information system software does your institution use that you are able to use an API? I'm thinking that for Laura and University of Arkansas, you weren't actually able to use the API with your faculty information system. And so instead you used the ORCID affiliation manager, correct?
We use the ORCID affiliation manager for the system of the employment, but we also have a separate software, and please forgive me, it's changed names 3 or 4 times. And I do believe there's an API hook for it, for the information system that the faculty do their annual reviews on, which is a different system. So we are trying to link in with them, and digital measures, which is now something different. But for Workday is where we do our employee records, and we're not able to do that.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, it looks like that was what the question was about, so that's great to know. And yes, digital measures, which I think is now called Faculty Success by Watermark. And for example, at Temple, Symplectic Elements, there are a few others. We actually have a Trello board that we can put a link to in the chat that has a lot of the kind of common software systems that a lot of institutions in the US are using. And each one has a little card where you can see, does it have an ORCID integration available or not? So that might be helpful to everyone that's on the call too. Now we have a question for Alicia at Temple. Was there any other outreach swag that Temple was able to create internally besides paper materials? So this person asking the question says that they have requested materials for their institution and love the lollipop idea, but they have no promotional funds available. So they've tried being creative with promo items, but it does eat into personal funds. And so if you have any insight on that, it would be great to hear.
Yeah, definitely. I advocate for the lollipops because they're relatively inexpensive. And if you have like a makerspace in your library, then you can partner with them to create stickers or buttons. I know we've done that in the past as well. Currently, we actually have another Research Resources Day coming up next Tuesday, and we're going to be handing out cookie cutters that were 3D printed. Again, that's in conjunction with our makerspace. So finding creative ways to collaborate with your colleagues is also a great way to handle that. Of course, you know, materials they do cost as well, but at least it's sort of already built into the budget.
Great, thanks, Alicia. Any other questions for our two presenters or questions about ORCID in general? Let's see, I think I can make it so that people can unmute also if you prefer. Although I'm not seeing how to do that. I think it's because I'm sharing. Or I guess people can feel free to raise their hands too.
I would just like to add that this was kind of my personal thing, and I don't know why, but it became a personal thing. And I have to say, it has been the most rewarding project I've done in the 33 years I've been in the library. I've had only 3 slightly negative emails. Everybody else has been so wonderful and so supportive and so thankful that we're supporting their research endeavors, that it really gave me new hope. Maybe I'll keep going a lot longer than I thought and not retire so soon.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. That's amazing. And yes, so the ORCID US community has been around since 2018, and even just seeing kind of the growth in awareness and interest and usage of ORCID over the course of the last 6 years has been really rewarding as well. It's really nice when you're putting work in, and maybe it takes a while to see the results actually start to come through, but seeing that adoption and seeing things actually working is extremely rewarding. Any other questions or comments? Here's a question. For the ProQuest ETDs, are the grad students required to get an ORCID ID to submit?
Oh, so no, they're not required. It's an optional like field that can be entered when they're filling out their contact information when they're submitting their thesis or their dissertation.
Great, thanks, Alicia. I know we do have a few universities that I know of have an ORCID requirement for ETDs. And as you mentioned, Alicia, the ProQuest ETD submission system, it does have just a field where you can type in an ORCID ID, which, you know, ideally it would be an API integration so that there would not be room for error. Like if you accidentally type in one wrong number, it kind of throws off the whole thing. So for anyone who's using the ProQuest ETD submission system, we encourage you to reach out to that vendor and just ask them to try to make that ORCID field an authenticated field that uses the API. But it's great that that's available. Awesome, and thanks, Paolo, for sharing the coaster design in the chat. ORCID has a brand library with, you know, images and things that can be reused that Laura mentioned. And of course, we also have outreach resources, technical resources, examples from many different kinds of institutions. So if you think of any questions related to ORCID after this session, always feel free to reach out to us at orcidus@lyrasis.org. And of course, we're happy to take any remaining questions or comments as we're nearing the top of the hour. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Many thanks again to our volunteer presenters, Laura and Alicia. Thank you so much for sharing your case studies and your insights with us. We will be sharing the recording and slides out to everyone who registered for this. So stay tuned, and we hope to see you all again on a future event. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.